I've been thinking a lot lately about where things are headed globally, economy-wise, for next year. Like, where's the actual growth going to be?
It's definitely the big question on everyone's mind as we look towards 2025.
For sure. And look, we've got some, well, really interesting IMF projections for GDP growth to dig into today.
Yeah, some fascinating numbers across various countries.
And for you listening, maybe you want to get a good grasp on this fast, but without, wading through dense economic reports.
Yeah, it's the plan.
Right. So that's what we're going to do. Break down these forecasts, figure out what's behind them, and point out what's really important. Think of it as your quick guide to the global growth picture for 2025.
Exactly. More than just numbers, the stories behind them.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive, unpack these IMF growth figures. We're looking at places like the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia.
China, Singapore, Thailand, Australia, Russia, South Korea, Japan. Quite a list.
Oh,
And we also got some helpful context added about India and the US, which came up later. Okay, let's jump in. Southeast Asia seems to be buzzing.
it really is. Some economies there are showing really strong projected performance. Take the Philippines, they're projected to lead the region, 5.5% GDP growth.
Wow, 5.5%. That's pretty substantial. What's really pushing that?
Well, a big piece of it seems to be their business process outsourcing sector.
Yeah.
The BPO industry there is really well established.
Like the BPO sector, I remember hearing they actually overtook India years ago.
That's right. Back in 2008, they made a real strategic push, education, infrastructure, and it paid off. And, since 2010, that sector's averaged, what, about 6% growth annually?
Yes.
Consistently?
6% average growth just from that sector. That shows a real long-term impact from that focus.
But it's not just BPO, is it? I think I saw mentions of like a growing middle class, too.
You're absolutely right. That's another key factor. A rising middle class boosts domestic demand, naturally. And having a strong, available workforce is obviously crucial for supporting things like BPO.
Makes sense.
Actually, there was a study, I think A.T. Kearney back in 2017, that highlighted how good Southeast Asia's overall business environment and workforce were.
So a really positive mix of factors there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only the Philippines showing that strength, right? Vietnam, Indonesia?
Yeah, exactly. Vietnam's looking at 5.2% growth,
Yeah.
and Indonesia around 4.7%. So it really underlines that resilience, that dynamism across a lot of Southeast Asia.
You're part of a bigger picture then.
Seems like it. I mean, the broader outsourcing industry across the whole Asia-Pacific region is growing too, something like 8.5% a year. So there's this wider trend lifting these countries.
Okay, interesting. Now, Malaysia's also in there, 4.1% projected. Still solid, but a little lower than the others we just mentioned. Any reason why?
Yeah, 4.1% is still decent growth for Malaysia, definitely helped by investment and exports picking up. But it is a slight step down from how they were doing in, say, late 2024.
Ah, okay. So maybe just a bit of moderation there.
Could be various things, global demand shifts, maybe some specific domestic factors playing a role.
Got it. So Southeast Asia, clearly a hotspot for growth. Now, let's switch gears a bit. China, their projection for 2025 is 4%. Now, 4% sounds big, but there's some backstory, right?
There is, yeah. That 4% comes after the IMF already nudged their 2024 forecast down a bit to 4.8%.
Okay. Why the downward nudge?
Well, they're facing some real challenges. Domestic demand has been slowing down, and then you have the ongoing global trade stuff, tensions, tariffs, that hits their manufacturing.
Right, those headwinds we keep hearing about.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it might be more than just a short-term blip.
That's a really important point. Looking further out, the IMF actually thinks China's potential growth could slow down even more, maybe averaging around 3.8% between 2025 and 2030.
3.8% average. Why the slowdown?
The big reasons cited are, well, demographics, a declining workforce, and also slowing productivity growth. The IMF suggests pretty significant reforms are needed to change that longer-term picture.
A shrinking workforce and productivity issues. Those are tough structural problems. It's interesting. We actually saw someone comment on the original data, sort of questioning if even that 4% figure for China is reliable. Skepticism about the data itself.
And that touches on, the inherent difficulty in forecasting, especially for such a massive, complex economy. These are projections based on available info, but yeah, they're always subject to change interpretation.
Absolutely. A good reminder. Okay, let's shift again. Another part of Asia, but with much lower growth numbers. Japan and South Korea. Japan's projection is just 0.6%. South Korea at 1%. That's quite a contrast to Southeast Asia.
It really is stark, isn't it? Japan's low number especially points to some Very deep-rooted structural issues, mainly an aging population combined with productivity that's just kind of stalled.
We hear a lot about Japan's aging population. How does that directly, put the brakes on the economy?
Well, you get this high old age dependency ratio, fewer working age people supporting more retirees. That strains public finances, social security. It just makes it harder for the economy to be dynamic.
Right.
And Japan hasn't really used immigration much to offset that shrinking workforce. The IMF even talks about shrinkonomics policy lessons from Japan's aging experience.
Shrinkonomics.
Yeah.
Wow, that really captures it. So it's this fundamental population shift acting as a major drag. Is there anything Japan can do? Any way to counter it?
There are possibilities. Getting more women and older people into the workforce could help somewhat. And then there's technology, more automation, AI that could potentially boost productivity, even with fewer workers.
So focus on participation and tech. Seems critical. And South Korea at 1%, still low. Are they facing similar issues, maybe just not quite as severe?
That's likely a fair way to put it. South Korea also has aging issues, low birth rates, similar kinds of pressures on long-term growth, even if the exact scale or specifics might differ a bit from Japan.
Okay, so we've looked at the high flyers in Southeast Asia, the challenges in China, Japan, South Korea. What about the others? Singapore was 2%, Thailand 1.8%, Australia 1.6%, Russia 1.5%. Any quick thoughts there?
Yeah, those numbers probably reflect more of a mixed bag of factors for each country. Things like how much they depend on global trade, how strong their own consumer spending is, commodity price swings, government policies too. It gets pretty specific to each one.
Right, more unique situations.
Yeah.
Now, one thing we noticed missing from that initial IMF list was two huge economies, India and the U.S. But luckily, we got some figures from listener feedback.
Yes, that was really helpful context to round things out. According to that feedback, India's projected growth for 2025 is actually really strong, somewhere between 6.4% and 6.8%.
Whoa, okay, so India's growth is projected even higher than the Philippines or Vietnam. That really stands out.
It certainly does. Highlights India as a major engine of global growth right now.
And the U.S. figure.
The U.S. projection was more moderate, somewhere in the range of 1.8% to 2.3%.
Okay, 1.8 to 2.3%. So steady, but not the high-octane growth like India or parts of Southeast Asia.
Exactly. Still signifies ongoing economic activity, just at a different pace.
Right. Okay, let's try and pull this all together. We've covered a lot of ground. What are the main takeaways when you look at this whole 2025 growth picture?
Well, I think the clearest thing is the divergence. You've got this real dynamism in Southeast Asia and obviously India, driven by things like outsourcing, demographics, strong growth expected there.
Yeah, definite bright spots.
But then you contrast that with more mature economies, Japan, maybe China to an extent now, South Korea facing these structural headwinds like aging populations, slowing productivity, which are pulling their growth rates down.
So not one single story for the global economy.
Yeah.
Very different regional pictures.
Precisely. And it's so important to remember these are just projections, right? Based on what we know now, things can change. Geopolitics, trade shifts, maybe some new tech breakthrough.
Yeah.
Any of that could alter these forecasts.
Absolutely. Always caveats with forecasts. And you mentioned earlier how interconnected everything is. Growth in one place affects others.
Totally. It's one big system. You know, strong growth in Asia could mean more demand for goods from elsewhere. A slowdown in a major economy like China that ripples through global trade, investment flows. It's all linked.
This has been, really useful getting this snapshot from the IMF data. So for you listening, the big takeaway is this picture of expected growth in 2025, where the hot spots are, where the challenges lie, and some of the reasons why.
And it makes you think, doesn't it? What do these different growth rates mean for, say, global trade patterns, or where investment money might flow, or even, opportunities for people in different countries?
Those are the big questions that follow from this. Okay, here's a final thought then, something for you to chew on. Thinking about all these projections and factors, what single thing do you think will have the biggest impact on whether these predictions actually come true by the end of 2025? Or could we see major shifts? Definitely something worth keeping an eye on as the global economy unfolds.